Along with the likes of the Veteran Sherman, who have surely secured their place in the EUC Hall of Fame, it seems like the Extreme Bull Commander is out here to take its place. Will it? Well, let's find out. The Sherman is a great wheel, and for every hobbyist, most everyone already has one. But if you don't, well, expect a long wait because there's production issues and it's almost out of stock everywhere. That's why they made the Abrams using the 21700 cell batteries. As someone who owned the Veteran Sherman, besides the range, the roll cage, and the speed, which was never before seen, it really didn't have anything else special. The roll cage was industrious, but did its job, and allowed for customizations. You don't have that roll cage on the Commander. However, the Commander is a wheel that offers more performance and more range. The fastest speed on the Sherman ever recorded was 83 kilometers an hour, which is 52 miles per hour. Most people will be riding around 60 to 70, just because physics just aren't on your side when you're going that fast on an EUC. The Commander lets you pick out the best wheel that fits your needs, whether you want torque or speed. If you're one of those users that really care about pedal clearance, well, you're gonna like that on the Commander. They're higher off the ground, and even though there were pedal dips at the start, they've since fixed that with the latest firmware, similar to Sherman's early days. If you enjoy a seated riding experience and you like to explore on those long rides, well, I managed to cover 168 kilometers on this wheel, which is incredible, and a lot of it was seated just because of how comfortable it was to sit down. Both these wheels are terrible off-road, to be honest. They're too bulky, there's too much weight, and however, the trails around me are quite aggressive. There's massive boulders. I do understand that North American trails seems to be a little bit flatter and a bit more cared after, which these wheels might do a little bit better. But because these wheels are heavy, they drop down into every single pothole when you off-road. When you go off-road with a wheel like the 18XL for example, it tends to float above it more. Whereas on the Sherman or the Commander, it'll dip down into every single pothole. But really, if you're off-roading, I'd just take the S20. The Commander does come with high torque or high speed, which means it's good for climbing, which I can't really recommend doing on the Veteran Sherman, as you saw in the burnout video.
We are at the infamous death hill here. We're going to take a few attempts on the Commander. I do have a screen record of Darkness Spot happening in my pocket right now. I just updated the firmware, so this is the latest firmware. I'm going to climb this hill 3 times. There's a security guard watching over us, so we don't know but how many times we'll be able to do this. But I'm going to try to do this 3 times and see if it burns up this high torque version. It's a heavy wheel with 3,600 watt hours, but it definitely has the torque to make it up the hill. So that was pretty much 3-4 times. I mean, one time was user error, but we made it up the hill. So we're gonna bounce because the security guard is watching over us. But that's pretty much 3 times up this hill. You guys already know from my previous video, this is probably about 33 degrees. So with resistance as well, because it's on grass. But yeah, high torque version didn't burn out. That's good news.
This wheel is a lot more comfortable to ride seated compared to the Veteran Sherman because the top part is longer. I had an issue where if I sat down on the Veteran Sherman, I would be hitting against the roll cage. Now, there are quite a few negatives. The handle at the front and the back are quite sharp. They need to round off the edges. The light is disappointing. It's the same light used on the Hero, so don't expect a good light on the Hero as well. The light isn't as good as the Sherman. The display is negligible. It's so small and you can barely see anything. Dock power pads, they're short and narrow, so you can't really bend your knees since you instantly hit the power pads. The speakers face backwards. I'm not sure why they put it on in the first place, but if you go above 40 kilometers an hour, you really can't hear it anymore. They could have used the case of the EUC to amplify the sound, like when I modded my Veteran Sherman to have the speakers face towards my motor. Now the good news is that the Commander does extremely well in water. Though there isn't an official IP rating, I have tested this through multiple times in the rain, and so has the CEO of this company. And through the details of the design, you can tell that they really cared for it in this part of the design process. For one part, the trolley handle uses a separate compartment from the motherboard, so even though it's using that same top cover, the water does not float right into the motherboard. The spiked pedals are stock, and it's probably one of the only wheels that comes with spiked pedals. However, I do suggest upgrading. They're a little bit mediocre for my taste. I do suggest something a bit more aggressive. There's a familiar GOII feel. Well, that's because it uses the GOII firmware. And it rides very similar to a GOII, except you're carrying more weight, given the 3600 watt-hour batteries. This is a good wheel for riders who want a Monster Pro, where they want the distance of 3600 watt-hours, but not the size. I'm really not sure how much smaller they can make this, given the batteries that are needed to fit into this thing. Really, there's minimum adjustments you'll have to make if you're coming from a Veteran Sherman or any other top-of-the-line GOII wheels. However, since there's higher pedal clearance, you do have to use a bit more force when you turn, but you'll adjust to that very quickly. In short, you pick the Commander over the Sherman because, well, first, you can't obtain the Sherman. 2, you want more range. I got 120 kilometers on my Sherman. I'm able to get 168 on the Commander. 3, you want a better seated riding experience. And 4, you want more torque, if you go for the high torque model, that is.
So the Commander is, all in all, a crazy range wheel, which will let you cover 170 or so kilometers, less if you're riding faster than me. Probably most, since I was doing a range test. I didn't want to go all that fast because that doesn't reflect, I think, the general audience or general amount of riders. But if you're also into seated riding, this would be the wheel to get. But in some ways, this wheel doesn't feel like a finished product. I mean, when you're paying $3-4 grand for a product, you really want it close to as perfect as possible, or you want there to be places where you can see that they've actually taken steps for development. And in some ways, this wheel feels like it's a very GOII wheel. Even though it's not a GOII product, it's still very GOII ideology, which is them just putting on batteries as much as you can. The only part where I think they thought about was the trolley handle, where if it gets rained on, it doesn't flow into the motherboard. They have a separate compartment for that. But I mean, display, right? You can't really see anything on it. The speakers face backwards. Again, you're paying $3-4 grand for a product, and you're basically just getting performance stacked on. You're not getting a finished, refined product. Perhaps that's because the Kingston S20 has ruined it for me. And I'm not obliged in any way to say anything good about the S20. Having been on the S20 or other products, I can't recommend this wheel over others, especially in comparison to the S20. If we're just comparing the newest products, S20 and the Commander are not really the same product. I guess that's because I don't really need the 168 kilometer range. So that's how I feel about the Commander. I do want to give a huge shout out to eRides from Europe and Free Motion from North America. If you guys are in those markets for a brand new EUC, be sure to check them out. Without them sponsoring this video, it wouldn't be possible for me to have received the Commander for review and be able to show you guys this product. I do also want to Give a huge shout out to anyone who has been watching this channel, liking, subscribing, commenting on the channel. We've hit over 3,000 subscribers. Thanks to everyone who has interacted with the video. And I do have the S20 video, and I have a high performance scooter coming out. I do apologize for the delay that this video took. As you can see, I'm in a new environment, so had to get everything set up. But I appreciate everyone's support. I'll see you guys in the next video.